Okay, who's going to start?
Well, I'll jump in since I was kind of thinking about it. In fact,
Okay.
I already gave this spiel to my husband earlier, and when I wrapped up, I said, shit, it's too bad I didn't just record this and mail it. And anyway, I think when you've written and you've decided you're going to publish whatever it is, I think you really have to ask yourself a lot of questions and, like really look realistically at what you're doing. Like that question of yours, Mark, from a last session or the one before, as to the reason why you want to publish, what your expectations are. You have to think about that. And I really think, as we've also said, you have to have someone else's opinion on the thing, like a serious opinion, not just sort of, some friend or your spouse reads it and says, yeah, it looks good. I didn't know you had it in you or whatever. And I really have doubts about friends and family. Like, unless someone in that group you can trust to give you an honest but not sort of biased a comment or set of opinions on your piece, you might be better off finding someone else, like among a group of writers or somebody that's not really involved in your life. Because if what the person tells you rubs you the wrong way or somehow changes the way you see that person, it could really mess things up. Like, say it's a work colleague or your spouse or a sibling or a good friend. And if every time you see that person again, that what they thought of your piece of writing is sitting between you like a big lump, that could really mess up your life. So you really have to think about these things. And I know it may be hard for some to find a good critique group or partner, but with the internet, and I don't know, I think with all the writing that's going on, I think most cities probably have some sort of writing group. But then I don't know. I mean, Victoria, BC, British Columbia, where I live, is just full of writers. So maybe my view of things isn't quite accurate or can't be applied to the rest of the world. But I really do think it's best if maybe another thing you could do possibly is take some sort of course or, join a class of some sort at a community college or wherever that offers different courses in writing, and you might bump into someone or connect with something there. And then you get that second opinion, and hopefully it'll be a useful opinion, like not just sort of mutual admiration or else the kind of thing you find sometimes in critique groups where people kind of duke it out. And I have to say, I find men tend to be the harsher critiquers, at least in the groups I've been. I've seen at least 2 occasions where a guy has really torn up somebody else's writing in a really damaging way to that person. And like, I'm not saying all, men are going to be harsh on women's writing, especially because the victims in this case were women. But I think, you have to be prepared for all kinds of bumps and to take some risks, because things don't always work out. But then, that's the way it is with trying to get traditionally published too. So writing is not it's a hard road, actually, in some ways.
It can be a contact sport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for some it can, and I'm not really good at that stuff.
I'm curious about these guys who were just tearing up somebody's writing. Like, what? I can't understand that at all. I guess why someone would do that.
One of them was a guy that he was always quite critical in our groups. Like, I think he had fairly high standards, and I think most of his reading was classics, like heavy 19th century works and so on, and he had quite high standards for things. He critiqued some of my stuff, and he wasn't cruel, but he kind of he gave me some things to think about. But this one time, the person whose piece of writing it was, she'd written this sort of science fiction romance, and it was quite well done, I thought, with a sort of it wasn't a simplistic plot or anything, and I can't remember, something about the romance part of it, the sex scenes or something, just twigged this guy somehow, so he just laid into her. And it was just kind of over the top. I mean, I think he started out by meaning well. I don't think he intended to be, I'm really going to get her this time. But he just kind of kept going and going and going, and it got out of control. Now, the other fellow, I didn't know him very well. From what I could see, he's a really good writer. He's had some success, sort of in the writing scene. And the woman whose piece he critiqued, like, I think her thing was also romance, but sort of straight romance, not science fiction. And I really don't think that was his thing, because his thing was sort of Lovecraftian, but taken in a different direction with a kind of satire and really showy off kind of intellectual writing. And I think he was the wrong guy to be critiquing a piece of kind of light romance. And the joke is, though, that lady ended up getting a 3-book deal with Penguin. So there you go.
I think that's one of the problems with critique groups is that, some people have certain things that work for them and certain things that don't, or certain genres that they just have no interest in. If you write in something that someone in the group doesn't like, not because of your quality, but just you may just get the hammer on you constantly because this just doesn't work for that person.
Yeah. So you have to be prepared to move to a different group, or kind of filter the comments through, the fact that so-and-so doesn't really, doesn't read your genre. And I think when someone's delivering a critique, you should say that up front. You should say, look, I don't read romance. I don't really want to read romance. So I'll just, my comments don't really apply maybe to your plot. I'll just confine them to, I don't know, the way you describe things or some of the dialogue or something. You should find something you think you can offer a reasonable opinion on, but not let your dislike or unfamiliarity with the genre color your comments too much, because especially if the other person is kind of, it's like their first work or something, their first novel or something that they're serious about, that they haven't been doing it very long, you don't want to kind of run them down and beat them up.
Right.
Because then they very well might say, well, I'm a shitty writer and I'm not going to do anymore.
Yeah.
It's just not kind.
I've tried a range of different kinds of groups, and there was a guy I worked with who talked me into attending a critique group that he was in, and I went a couple of times. And I think shortly after the last time I went, the group broke up and never met again, because they were a bunch of guys who were probably 5 to 10 years older than me. And I think they had been in that group so long they couldn't stand each other anymore. And there was one guy in particular in the group where, again, just for the 1 or 2 times that I went, the rest of them would just gang up on him and just, pick at this and pick at that. And he would get his back up and he'd get offended and they'd start yelling at each other. And it's like, okay, that doesn't work for me. That's not going to be what I want to do. There's other things. I've written in my why am I blanking on the word? The acknowledgments in some of my books about a woman by the name of Zoe Keithley, who you mentioned, in Victoria there's a writing scene. I think there's a writing scene in every community, every city, every town. You just need to find it. And I found Zoe through a guy I met in a training program for a half marathon. And what she did was, it wasn't a critique group. Instead, it was more a writing exercise group. And she would do it once a month for 3 months. And it was basically, a small group of writers would get together and she'd run us through some exercises like, sitting in the room, closing your eyes, and then picking out a sound that they could hear. And then describing the sound, or looking around in the room and finding an object and describing the object. And then it would eventually build up to building a scene and then doing a writing exercise on the scene. And then everybody would read it. And you had to only say positive things. Pick out things that stuck with you from what people read and things that were notable and that type of thing. And through that group, I've met all sorts of other writers, and it's now, she's not here anymore, but there are several other groups that do kind of the same thing, just a writing prompt, and everybody writes and shares it, and people say positive things about what struck them, about what the person wrote. And there's another one very much like that I saw on Twitter from a woman in Iowa, and they're just doing it on Zoom now. And so every once in a while I participate in that. But I do think your comment about getting other people's opinions, I think is just absolutely critical. I think most creative people are both their worst critics and potentially their biggest fans at the same time. And our judgment is clouded because of that. And it's important to find people you trust to give, as you said, an honest and unbiased opinion. And most of the people who are involved in your life aren't going to do that. It was great. I loved it. Okay, but that doesn't help me.
Yeah.
Either
that, or if, I don't know. I mean, there's some people that are you have hypercritical moms or siblings that, where you've got sort of an uneasy relationship with. Yep. They might use that as an opportunity to kind of, jab you a bit or pummel you psychologically. And if you know that you have that kind of relationship with one of these people, it's best to just not go there.
Right.
Find someone else that you can trust, who doesn't really have any sort of problematic issues with you, so that when they do give an opinion, it's not colored by something else, some kind of subtext. They're not going to use your piece of writing, she really thinks she's done something great here. Well, I'll fix that. You want to stay away from people like that when you're getting an opinion on your piece, because it is so personal. I mean, I know we're always told grow a thick skin and all that, but I have a feeling if you grow the skin thick enough to resist everything, you probably aren't going to write as well.
Well, and you're not going to really hear what people are saying too.
Yeah.
Berthold, what about you? Have you ever done any critique groups or writing groups or?
No, I've never really done a critique group. I have individual beta readers that I trust, that I've met over the years. Pat Prescott he's a longtime reader of my blog he'll do beta reading for me. And Pat is great because he doesn't he's not really into horror particularly, but he'll read what I write and he'll say, sort of like you were talking about, Audrey, he'll say, look, I'm not really a horror reader, but this is what I think. This is my opinion. This is what I liked. This is what could be better. And having someone like that who can critique your work honestly and is willing to be harsh, but still fair and understanding what, he's only there to help me. If he says something that's harsh about the work, it's only with the intent to help. Having someone like that is incredibly valuable. Now, the question, of course, is how do you find people like that? The internet is great. I mean, Pat he reads my blog. So at some point he said, I'll be a beta reader. But I don't know how you would go about finding somebody like that if you didn't just have the good fortune to, happen to run into them.
Well, that's where it helps to, join the blogosphere or some sort of social media thing related to writing where you can connect with people that have that in common, like other writers. Otherwise, like I say, maybe the writing course or something, like you're not, even if you think you know how to write, at least in the course, you'll meet other people, right? That you might be able to connect with. Although, of course, in-person courses are kind of a thing of the past now, but, there's always stuff online. But I think you do have to connect with some sort of community. Otherwise, it's just you and all the sort of, we writers are a market for all kinds of stuff, to tap into for money, right? Like all this stuff about you must have a professional editor. Maybe that's something else I think people have to figure out for themselves is, do they need a professional editor? Because some people can edit themselves. And I know you shouldn't say that. It's like that joke about the person who thinks they can be their own lawyer. Right?
Yeah, an attorney who represents himself as a fool for a client.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, and the same thing. A writer who thinks they can edit themselves
I see that on Twitter sometimes, writers reacting to that kind of advice and say, I edit my own stuff, and I just think, oh gosh, we had our conversation on the rules of writing, the first video the second video that we did, and I'm very dismissive of the rules of writing, but I do believe that it's critical for people to have someone else edit their work.
Mm-hmm.
I just, and it may not be a full blown, developmental editing or something like that, but at least proofreading it, copy editing it, finding those little holes that the person who wrote the story doesn't see. I just think that's important.
Yeah, well, if you have a good beta reader, they'll catch some of the plot problems or the things where you forgot about something or other and there's a plot hole a mile deep. But I don't know, I edit my own stuff, and I think it's fairly, like in terms of small errors and typos and this and that, I think it passes.
Well, everything of yours that I've read is very clean. I mean, I don't read one of your stories and think, God, typos.
No, all I have is Canadian spelling. So
yeah, there you go.
But yeah, I mean, I think people have to figure out, do I need an editor? And the other thing to remember is that, okay, say you're going to have your thing professionally edited so that you have a shot at traditional publishing. Well, it isn't a magic wand, really. And just because someone calls themselves professional doesn't mean they're all that good.
Right.
So that's a minefield too. Is you have to. I think the really good editors are not going to be cheap, but also just because you paid someone a couple of $1,000 doesn't mean you're going to end up with a sure thing either.
Right.
So it's kind of murky.
Right. I know Kevin Brennan, I think, has blogged, or maybe he's emailed me. There are these websites where you can bid on editing people's projects. I think the main one is called Fiverr.
Oh yeah,
he's taken. I'm sorry.
It's famous for all kinds of things, cover design.
But he's taken a look at it and said, by the time a writer picks their winning editor, the bid is so low. There's just no way that you can actually make any money doing it through that website. Mm-hmm. And like you said, what is it you're actually ending up paying for if you pay such a low price?
Mm-hmm.
So, no, I think, when I started writing, it was a very solo effort. For years, I wrote, and I might share stories with my immediate family. When I wrote Bridgeport, I had my parents read it, and they both were willing to tell me what they really thought. My first version of that story, my dad referred to as a trip down misogyny alley or something like that, because every single female character was not very well portrayed, I guess. And that really was an eye opener for me, because I wrote it the way I wrote it. And when he said that, it's like, yeah, you're right. All the women in this story are crazy. That's not good. So that was part of the rewrite, was fixing some of that. And those are the kinds of comments that I think a writer hears, whether they hear them from a beta reader or a critique group or an editor. I just really think it's important to have some different eyeballs on the story.
And it does help to have more than one set of eyeballs. Like I would think the ideal number would be at least 3, and maybe up to 7. Like if you have too many, I remember reading some kind of quite detailed instruction on how to get beta readers, line up 12 people and do it like this, send them to these ones and then these. You'd go crazy with the feedback, I think, if they all delivered. That'd be just too much. But if you have, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5, maybe half a dozen, you can find out you'll see things that they all pick up on, probably. And those are the things you really have to pay attention to, because, here's a sort of a random-ish sample of people, and they all said that, this character doesn't work, or they, they do something and it doesn't make any sense why that person would have changed that way, or that they all say that your dialogue needs work, or all your characters sound the same, or something like that. Like they all say that, then you better kind of just focus on that and do something about it. Whereas if one person says something's great and the other person says it's not, then you might be able to just kind of say, oh, those are just individual sort of quirks. So yeah, I think having different sets of eyeballs is useful too.
Yeah. So were you in a critique group in connection with anything that you published?
Me?
Or yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. When I published The Friendship of Mortals, I just did that, I think, I just did that without any input in 2010. Don't forget, this is prehistoric times. And I think it was after I published it on Smashwords, but before I published it on Amazon, that I ran it through my then critique group. And the personnel of that group sort of changed over the years, so that it wasn't always the same people, which was actually good in a way. And I think I did the same with the other 3 books in that series.
Did you run it through the critique group once you had a draft finished, or did you?
Oh, once I had it published as an ebook.
Yeah, okay. Because I mean, one of the feelings I got with that critique group that I was in was that they were sharing things as it was being written, and I just don't think I could do that. Because
I've done that too.
And how did that work?
Well, it was with She Who Comes Forth, that novel set in Egypt, which is sort of a sequel to the Herbert West series.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually quite well done. And the way I did that was I committed to the critique group. This was to make myself
That's right. Yeah. A chapter a month.
I will have a chapter every month. And I did. and actually, I didn't change the chapter sort of beginnings and endings after that. I just kept, I think there were 16 of them, so it must have taken me 16 months. And I coughed up the 7,500 words or whatever each one of these things was. And so they were as close to a first draft as they could. And, you're advised not to do that, but I did. And for that one, it worked. So,
How helpful or how good was the feedback you got? And how did that impact your writing of the story moving forward as you got that feedback?
I think what I would do is, contrary to what I've said before, where I don't start editing until I finished, I think I sort of did that chapter by chapter. And after every meeting, I would kind of compile all the comments and look at them and think about them, and then make whatever changes I thought were necessary to that chapter. I know I went through that process, but I have to say, I'm not sure if I did that right after or whether I saved all those things up until I was finished. And then I went through each chapter's comments and notes I'd taken during the meetings and the comments that people attached to the document. Because what we would do is we'd send our document out, people would read and add notes within the document. Some used track changes, some just inserted stuff right into the text. And then after the meeting, everyone would send back all the documents with their notes on it. So you had, and then of course one could always make one's own notes during the meeting, so-and-so says blah kind of thing. So then I'd have to go through all these 4 texts, like my own notes and their notes and kind of thing. I think I probably did that after I was all done, rather than going chapter by chapter, because then I had my own ideas and I moved stuff around and, so yeah, I think that's how I did it. So the next chapter going forward, well, to tell you the truth, I didn't make enormous changes to the plot as a whole. It was just kind of within each chapter that I would adjust things. So I don't know. My impression is it worked, but someone might look at the book and say, "Well, dear, you know."
Yeah, I guess what I was getting at was because of the way I write, um, in which frequently writing is how I discover the story
Mm-hmm.
and what's going to happen. I don't know. I want to do that on my own and not do the chapter by chapter, or be critiqued on what I've written up to this point before I've figured out the rest of it out. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
sense?
then it would be like it was being written by the critique group.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and they might make suggestions during their critiques about things that might, as vague as my stories are sometimes, that might head me in a different direction, and I don't know that I want to do that while I'm writing.
Well, to tell you the truth, I don't think that's really the recommended way to do things. I
Yeah.
mean, everyone's read, or a lot of people have read that book by Stephen King on writing, and he always says you do your first draft with the door of your writing room closed,
Yeah.
and then I guess you open the door when you're all done, and you've got the thing whipped into shape. And that's actually what I subscribed to before, but it was just for that one book that I thought I'd do it this other way, and it actually worked. But maybe I was just lucky. I don't know. And I did kind of have a really definite direction I was headed in. So it wasn't really hazy. I knew where I was going, and I wasn't letting anything derail that. It was just sort of a matter of some of the details.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I want to also talk about the importance of covers,
Yes.
cover art, and it's something that I've struggled with because I don't have the tools to create really good covers, and I know that people use Canva and maybe Adobe or whatever, and I've done a cover on Canva. I thought it was a good cover. Now when I look at it, I think, I don't know. But
yeah, I did my first covers with Paint. Microsoft Paint. Yeah, man, I won't even say anything about them. And luckily, that was when I was still just with Smashwords, and they upped their requirements for size of the image.
Yeah.
And at that point, I sort of bit the bullet, and I've been looking. There's a thing called the Book Designer. It's a site, and it has a whole lot of stuff. But one of their things is the monthly ebook design awards.
Yeah.
Anyone, even a professional designer or an amateur, can submit a cover image.
Yeah.
And I look at those sometimes just to get ideas or just to get a feel for what I like in the way of covers. And so I use that. Now, I have had the temerity to design my own covers, and just with Canva, which is, I don't think, really intended for stuff like that. It's more intended for ephemeral kinds of things. But I don't know. I really enjoy doing it. And now it may be, I have an idea that maybe if I write that sequel to She Who Comes Forth, I may just have professional covers done for both of them.
Yeah.
So they'll look kind of alike and they'll all be spiffed up. Because the covers on my Herbert West books really are, they look better than most of my own efforts. So that's about all I have to say about that. But yeah, I think you really do need although some people have really crummy looking covers, and yet their books seem to be wildly popular. So I really can't explain that. Berthold's covers are always good.
Well,
yeah. Well, he has a family connection.
Yes, so my mother is a professional graphic designer, so
yeah, there you go. Plus for you.
But your covers, Audrey, like She Who Comes Forth, so that's done with Canva, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean that's a fine cover, I think. That's
well, it's decent. I mean, it's not substandard, I wouldn't say, but it's not stellar either. There's only so much you can do with the elements and capabilities of that. But I enjoy it, and I have to say, sometimes when I don't feel like writing, I'll wamp up a cover image, even though I don't intend to ever use it. So it's just kind of it's sort of like video games. Instead of playing a video game while I'm goofing off, I'll fiddle around with images.
Well, that's good. Yeah. So.
Do you know what your mom uses to produce your covers?
Oh gosh, I can't think of the name of the I mean, I know it. I just can't think of it. I'll have to ask her and see what program.
Is it InDesign or GIMP?
I don't think so. No.
Let's see what else. The Photoshop. Those are the three that come to mind.
It's not Photoshop. It's like Photo Base. It's Photo something else, but not Shop.
Right.
Your Vespasian moon cover. When I was trying to come up with something for the dime, when I put it up on the first part up on Wattpad, I wanted to try to come up with something like that, but that's just something that I don't know how to do. And maybe if I sat there and wallowed in Canva and graphic images and different things, I could come up with it, but I just couldn't get there. So. My sister is she's not a professional graphic designer, but she got a degree in graphic design, and she does all sorts of different artistry and creative things, photography and other things. Now, at one point, she was painting murals on walls for businesses down in Orange County. She did the first couple of covers, but I think we got to a point where we were having creative differences over what I wanted my covers to look like versus what she wanted to do. And the last couple of covers I've asked her, and she's, yeah, and then it just never happens, which is fine. She's busy. And so that's, for me, to be honest, if I self-publish, the cover is the single biggest challenge for me right now.
Well, that was my single biggest expense. Yeah. Like I managed not to pay an editor, although I did pay Kevin Brennan something for beta reading, sort of a professional beta read of She Who Comes Forth. And that was helpful and worth it. But the covers were what cost me what I would consider big bucks. For 4 covers, I think I paid about $1,500. But that's for 4 covers, right? So they were about three something each, 300 something each. And I think that's probably about them. And the company or outfit I used was called Damonza. They're in South Africa. And they're not cheap, but they're good. See, that's the thing about cover design. I found it's that good, fast, cheap, pick 2, right? You're either going to put in the time to learn how to do it well yourself, or you're going to pay someone to do it, quickly. But you can't sort of have good, fast, and cheap rolled into one unless you're especially blessed with talent or something. Yeah. So, yeah. But I think it's worth it because that's the first thing that people see is the cover.
Right. I think Susan, for her, I don't know where she got the cover for Red Clay and Roses, but I think for Naked Alliances, her Florida crime novel, I think she went through Fiverr and had basically what you do is, put the idea out there and then people can bid on it and describe what it would look like. And then you can pick, the design you like and pay whatever the asking price for it is or whatever.
I think that would be the route to get a less, if you weren't prepared to spend a lot of money. But that book designer site and those monthly awards, I find if you page through there, you will. That's how I got onto these Damonza people, is because I went through covers and I saw ones that looked really good. And I thought, oh, who did this? And there's usually a link to the designer's site so you can go and look around and see what their prices are. And that was altogether, it worked out quite well. I sort of wish maybe I had not okayed some of the things as quickly as I did, but insisted more on, no, I want to see more of this and that. But I was just kind of bowled over with the whole thing. It looked so wonderful. And really, I'm happy with those covers. Although now that I look at them, I could, maybe we could have tweaked this or that. But on the whole, it's when you're dealing with professionals that charge quite a bit, you can be more demanding, I think, than you can if you just have a deal with someone like a friend or a relative. Yeah. Unless, of course, the relative doesn't mind you being demanding. So, it's one of those things.
Here's another. I know we have a minute and a half left to go. I just want to share one little other thing to think about. The title of your book is important also, and maybe what you think works may not actually work. So I'll just again tell you the story. A writer that I met through blogging, he at one point provided me with feedback on the titles of my books and said that One Night in Bridgeport sounds like it's a travel log, and Weed Therapy sounds like it's a gardening book.
Well, yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, but One Night in Bridgeport, that's what I don't know. Anyway.
It worked for me. I thought it's a good title.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. You cannot please everybody. You will get negative criticism from beta readers or critiquers or reviewers. That's maybe we could just end that with this. You won't please everybody. Yeah, you need a little bit of a thick skin, but accept the idea that some people will not like what you write. That's okay. It actually means you're a writer.
Right.